I'm Serene Jones, the president of Union Theological Seminary. Happy to welcome you to Union's critically important event, the Christian Calling to Protect Women's Right to Choose. In just a few months, the Supreme Court may entirely overturn Roe, robbing tens of millions of American women of the right to choose. In our conversations, we're going to be exploring faith-based reasons for this position. We're so excited to have Christina Catarucci, a senior writer at Slate, to join us as our moderator.
This discussion we're having today couldn't come at a more urgent time, and I am thrilled and honored to be here with four distinguished Christian leaders and theologians to talk about the faith-based case for abortion rights. We're joined today by Dr. Monica A. Coleman, professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. Jamie Manson is the president of Catholics for Choice, and Dr. Rebecca Todd Peters is a professor of religious studies and the director of the Poverty and Social Justice program at Elon University. Dr. Coleman, how does liberation theology support the fight for reproductive justice?
The core of liberation theology states that, God is against oppression, right? Because God is also for, a good quality of life. One of the significant ways in which African American women, and you can add many women of color in this country, have been oppressed is through their reproductive health system, whether that is through forced pregnancies or through forced sterility. And so liberation theology would say, well, first of all, that's a problem, right? So is that God wants you to be liberated around the areas in which you have been oppressed. But it's not just for the sake of countering oppression, but it's also about quality of life. So much of the conversation on abortion is about birth and not about life. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And so much of these conversations are tied to not wanting everyone to have abundant life, actually putting structures in place so that only a small percentage of people have agency and quality of life.
One of the things that's so important to tell people, especially non-Catholic audience, is just how extreme the Catholic Church's position is on reproductive health. You have this huge religious group with this very, very hard right, position on reproductive health that also has a lot of power over the medical system. 1 in 6 hospital beds in the United States belongs to the Catholic Church. So it's really powerful. None of these doctrines were developed or influenced by or written by anyone that had a uterus. This is purely the invention of men, and not just men, but men who ostensibly say they are celibate. And so they have absolutely no inroads into the life of women. No wives, no daughters. Obviously, we have an absolute ban on the ordination of women. 1 in 4 abortion patients in the United States identifies as Catholic. That means that abortion is part of the life of the church. The women who are cleaning the priests, washing their dishes and mending their vestments have probably had abortions. And we have a hierarchy that's calling them murderers.
In line with Jamie's comments about people without uteruses making all these laws, we have had virtually no history of a theology of gestation, right? There is no conversation about what is happening during the gestation process. This is a sui generis experience. What is happening there is not like anything else in human life. So we have simply not had those theological conversations yet. I had 2 children. I had 2 great pregnancies. I love my kids. I love my family. Christians love families, right? That's not the problem. The problem is the way in which we're saying that this thing that is happening, this gestation process, this developing prenate is equivalent in all ways to a living baby that has been born, right? And so we need much more theological discourse and to recognize that there's a difference, right? We have the Exodus text that talks about that difference.
We have these incredible resources in the Catholic tradition to actually make a great case for a Catholic support of abortion. The first one is, of course, our notion of the primacy of conscience. Conscience, and this is in the Catechism, individual conscience is the final arbiter in all moral decision-making. You can, in good conscience, go against church teaching if that inner voice that God has given us, that spark of light, tells us to do so. The other piece we have is this exceptional social justice tradition. One of the things I still love about the Catholic Church and why I still call myself a Catholic, we also have incredible theological thinking about human dignity. And again, forcing someone to give birth, how does that honor someone's human dignity?
Another core of liberation theology is the belief that the pursuit of justice is not ancillary to one's faith, but is a necessary outgrowth of one's faith. It is part of one's Christian faith to resist anti-Blackness, to resist patriarchy, to resist white supremacy, to resist capitalism, right? To resist these forces that are limiting and oppressive and death dealing to people of God, right? To all people, which we would say, if you're a Christian, you believe all people are people of God, right? To God's creation, and literally take actions that are going to support the full humanity, the full divinity of all of creation. And in this case, especially, women and those who are also identify as non-binary.
What are the theological arguments? There are so many theological arguments. There are theological arguments about justice. There are theological arguments about, parenting as a sacred task. There are theological arguments about, women as created in the image of God and having the capacity to make the decisions that shape their lives. There are so many different ways that we can talk about this differently.